In the cold silence between stars where the void stretched endlessly and light itself seemed to cower behind shadows, a single ship floated battered and forgotten. The Seraphim was a relic of a war humanity barely survived, a rusted shell against the infinite black inside it. Marcus Hale breathed slow and steady, his mind sharp despite the freezing grip of despair that had claimed many before him. Marcus was not a soldier anymore, not in the official sense anyway. His last orders were years old, lost in the collapse of communication between the scattered remnants of humanity. His mission was simple: survive and find others, if any still lived. Across the empty darkness, alien horrors roamed the skies, creatures of hunger and malice that had consumed entire civilizations. Humanity had stood against them once with mighty fleets and armies. Now Marcus was alone, one man against the endless dark. He checked the control panel, blinking frost from his eyelashes. The Seraphim barely clung to life, its reactor coughing weakly, its systems flickering in and out of consciousness. Supplies were low, water had to be rationed, oxygen filters were patchy, and the food packs had long since turned to tasteless sludge. Yet Marcus moved with a calm precision, repairing what he could, improvising where he must. The ship had become an extension of his own will. A faint blip appeared on the radar, a pulse so weak it could have been a glitch. Marcus narrowed his eyes, staring at the screen, his heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his veins. After months of silence, any sign was a beacon of hope or a death trap. He tapped the console, focusing the scanners, the signal repeated, faint, deliberate. He leaned back, thinking it could be another human, a survivor, or it could be one of them mimicking a human distress call to lure prey. He had seen the aftermath before, shattered ships floating like tombstones, victims torn apart by claws and teeth. Marcus touched the pendant around his neck, a simple metal token engraved with the Earth flag. It was a reminder of what he fought for, what he refused to let die. Engaging the thrusters, he steered the Seraphim toward the signal. The engines groaned but obeyed. He whispered encouragement to the ship as if it were a stubborn friend. It had carried him through firestorms and black holes, through ambushes and plagues. It would not fail him now. As he approached the source, the blackness thickened like a living thing, tendrils of shadow swirling against the void. Marcus tightened his grip on the controls. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but he forced himself forward. His spirit would not break, not here, not now. The source of the signal emerged from the dark, a station ancient and crumbling, hanging in space like a dying star. Its hull was scarred by battle and corrosion, lights flickering like dying embers. Marcus docked carefully, ready for anything. The airlock hissed open, revealing corridors choked with debris and the stench of decay. His boots crunched over shattered glass and twisted metal as he moved deeper into the station, weapon drawn. Every step was a defiance against the suffocating dread that tried to smother him. In the heart of the station he found them, a handful of survivors, pale and hollow-eyed, their bodies thin from starvation. Their leader, a woman named Captain Isla Vorn, met his gaze with a spark of defiance still burning in her sunken eyes. They had been trapped here, fighting off the horrors that prowled the darkness outside with dwindling weapons and even less hope. Marcus spoke with them, learned their stories, pieced together their shattered morale. He offered them the Seraphim, battered though it was, as a way out. It would be a tight fit, supplies would be even thinner, but it was a chance, a future. The decision was unanimous: they would follow him. As they prepared to leave, alarms suddenly blared, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. Marcus turned to the viewport and his blood ran cold. Shadows larger than mountains moved toward the station, drifting with a malevolent hunger. The darkness had found them. Without hesitation, Marcus led the charge back to the Seraphim, guiding the survivors through the maze of ruined corridors. His voice cut through the panic, firm and steady, his spirit unyielding. Behind them the walls began to shudder and groan as if the darkness itself sought to tear the station apart. But Marcus Hale was not a man who surrendered to fear. He was humanity's last light against the endless dark. And he refused to be extinguished. The Seraphim's engines roared to life as Marcus guided the ship away from the station, but the darkness outside seemed to swell in response. The shadows moved, undulating like living creatures, crawling across the void with a hunger that made the air itself feel heavy. The survivors huddled in the cramped quarters of the ship, their faces pale with fear, but Marcus's presence remained a steady anchor amidst the chaos. He didn't allow his own fear to show. In moments like these, when the weight of the universe pressed in from every side, it was easy to give in to despair. But Marcus knew better. He had lived through too many near-death encounters to let something as insidious as fear take hold of him now. "Status report," Marcus called over the intercom, his voice unwavering despite the mounting tension. Isla Vorn, the captain of the survivors, responded, her voice strained but firm. "We've got enough fuel to keep us moving for another couple of weeks, but we're running low on water and food. The reactor's at 50% efficiency. If we don't find a supply station soon, we're going to be sitting ducks out here." Marcus ran a hand over the controls, thoughts racing. The darkness outside was not just a physical threat, it was something far worse. It was a force of annihilation, a thing that fed on fear, on isolation, on the fragility of life itself. That was why it was so dangerous. It was patient, relentless, and it knew how to break you before it even touched you. He couldn't afford to think about that now. Survival was all that mattered. "We'll find a way," Marcus said quietly. "We've survived worse. We'll survive this." His words were simple but they carried weight. He wasn't just trying to reassure the survivors, he was reminding himself as well. He had lost everything, his home, his family, his people, but he had never once let go of his will to fight. He would not let this darkness claim him. He would not let it claim anyone else. As the Seraphim moved deeper into the void, the stars around them seemed to dim, as if even the heavens themselves were retreating from the oncoming storm. The station they had just escaped from was a distant memory now, its lights flickering weakly behind them. Marcus's mind raced as he scanned the stars ahead, searching for anything that could offer a glimmer of hope. A station. A ship. A beacon. Anything. Hours passed in tense silence, the only sounds the hum of the ship's engines and the occasional murmur from the survivors. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, and their eyes darted toward the viewports every few moments, as if expecting the shadows to overtake them at any time. It was impossible to keep the fear at bay for long, but Marcus could see something else in their eyes too, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. Isla approached Marcus as he worked at the navigation console. She was a strong woman, hardened by years of leadership in a world that had long since forgotten mercy. But even she couldn't hide the weight of the darkness closing in. "You're not telling us something," she said softly, her voice a mixture of concern and suspicion. "We've been out here for months, Marcus. We've seen what those things can do. What are we really up against?" Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "But I know this much. Whatever they are, they're not natural. They're not from this galaxy. And they're not going to stop until they've consumed everything." Isla nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. "So, what's the plan?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. The truth was, Marcus didn't have a plan. He was improvising every step of the way, driven only by the desire to keep moving, to keep fighting. But even he could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. "We need to find a way to fight back," Marcus said finally. "If we don't, then everything we've fought for will be lost. And I'm not ready for that." As the words left his mouth, a sudden jolt of static crackled through the ship's communication system. Marcus's eyes shot to the screen, fingers dancing over the controls. There, just on the edge of the void, a faint signal appeared, weak, distorted, but unmistakable. "Isla, get the others ready," Marcus ordered, his voice hardening. "We've got a chance." He adjusted the ship's course, heading toward the signal. The survivors gathered in the ship's common area, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. Some were too tired to even speak, while others murmured in disbelief. But all of them knew one thing: this was their chance, and they weren't going to let it slip away. The Seraphim hurtled toward the source of the signal, and the darkness seemed to close in tighter, as if the void itself was trying to pull them into its depths. Marcus's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind raced. Was this truly their salvation, or was it another trap set by the darkness? He had no way of knowing, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. They were running out of time. The Seraphim's engines hummed with a quiet urgency as Marcus pushed the ship toward the fading signal, the only lifeline in the crushing darkness. The survivors had gathered in silence, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety. Isla stood beside Marcus, her eyes scanning the viewports, her posture tense. They all understood the stakes. If this was a trap, they might not have a chance to escape. But there was no time to dwell on fear now. Not when they were so close. "Any idea what it is?" Isla asked, her voice low, her eyes never leaving the dark expanse outside. "I've got a feeling it's not one of them," Marcus said, glancing at the monitor, watching the signal pulse again, faint but constant. "It's too organized. Too deliberate." A part of Marcus's mind wondered if he was fooling himself, but he pushed the thought aside. The signal was real, and he would take whatever chance it offered. He had to. There were no other options. As the distance closed, the signal began to sharpen, growing clearer with each passing second. Marcus's pulse quickened, his thoughts moving faster now. What would they find? Another derelict station? A lone survivor, stranded just like them? Or something else entirely? The unknown stretched before him, like the dark expanse of space itself, filled with infinite possibilities. Minutes felt like hours. The darkness outside seemed to press in around them, its cold fingers stretching toward the Seraphim as if trying to pull the ship back into its embrace. The crew could feel it, the oppressive weight of it. But Marcus kept his focus, his eyes glued to the radar screen. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the signal flared brightly, and ahead, something appeared, small, but unmistakable. A ship. A real ship. Got it? Marcus shouted, his voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. We're not alone. Isla leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide as she saw it too, a vessel floating in the void, ancient and battered, but unmistakably intact. The ship was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen before. Its design was alien, sleek, and organic-looking, as though it had grown rather than been built. Its hull shimmered faintly with an ethereal glow, and intricate symbols, unlike any human language, adorned its surface. The crew aboard the Seraphim gathered at the viewport, their eyes filled with wonder and fear. For all the dangers they had faced, this new discovery brought with it an overwhelming sense of awe. What kind of ship was this? And what kind of beings could have built it? Marcus was the first to break the silence. I'm going in. Prepare for docking. Stay sharp. He guided the Seraphim toward the unknown vessel, his hands steady but his mind racing. The air was thick with anticipation. Every survivor on board could feel it. This was more than just a potential escape, this was a discovery that could change everything. If this ship was truly from another civilization, then it might hold the answers they so desperately needed. But Marcus knew better than to get too comfortable. He had learned not to trust appearances, especially in a galaxy as hostile as this one. The ship's hull loomed closer, and Marcus activated the docking clamps with a soft hiss. The Seraphim shuddered as it made contact with the alien ship, the sound of the seals locking into place echoing through the silent corridors. The crew quickly donned their spacesuits, prepared for whatever awaited them on the other side. The airlock door opened with a faint hiss, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the floor beneath their boots was smooth, almost organic, as though the ship had been grown rather than constructed. The air inside was breathable, but thick with a strange, metallic scent that seemed to vibrate in the back of Marcus's mind. They stepped cautiously into the alien ship, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and sway with a life of their own. As they moved deeper into the ship, Marcus felt a strange unease settle over him. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of distant machinery. It was as though the ship itself was waiting, watching them. Isla, ever the pragmatist, scanned the surroundings. This place is ancient, she said quietly, her voice reverberating in the hollow air. Whoever built this, they're long gone. Maybe not, Marcus muttered, his instincts screaming that something was not right. He moved forward, carefully inspecting the ship's interior. The walls were lined with symbols, intricate and beautiful, but their meanings were completely foreign to him. His hand brushed against one of the panels, and a soft hum responded, the symbols glowing faintly as if the ship itself had come alive at his touch. Suddenly, a low, resonant sound reverberated through the ship, a sound that seemed to come from deep within its core. It was almost like a heartbeat, rhythmic and slow. The survivors tensed, looking at each other in confusion. What was that? Before anyone could voice a question, a figure appeared from the shadows. Tall and elegant, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, the being was unlike any human or alien Marcus had encountered. Its form was fluid, like liquid metal, shifting with each step, and it radiated an aura of power and ancient wisdom. The being's voice came not through the air, but directly into their minds. It was deep, resonant, and strangely familiar. Welcome, travelers. You are not the first to seek refuge here, but you may be the first to understand what has been lost. The voice of the being reverberated through Marcus's mind, filling him with a strange sense of both awe and dread. He felt as though the very walls of the alien ship were listening to him, the ship itself alive, breathing in sync with the unknown entity standing before them. It was as though time itself had paused, giving him a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation. The figure's eyes burned with an ancient light, seeming to pierce through Marcus's very soul, but its presence wasn't hostile, it was something else, something far more enigmatic. Isla was the first to speak, though her voice was steady with a tension only barely hidden beneath her calm exterior. "Who are you?" she asked, her words echoing in the silence of the ship. The being's form shimmered, its appearance shifting with each word it spoke, as though its essence was in constant flux. "I am known by many names, but they are not the names that matter now," the entity's voice echoed through their minds, the words carrying a weight that Marcus felt in his bones. "I am a keeper of knowledge, a guardian of the forgotten. And you, travelers, have crossed into a place long hidden from your kind." Marcus stepped forward, his pulse quickening as the being's words sank in. "We're not from this place," he said, his voice steady despite the rush of questions flooding his mind. "We're survivors, humans, scattered after the wars and the darkness that follows. We've been fighting to survive for as long as we can. We didn't know there was anyone else left." The being's glowing eyes studied Marcus for a moment, then flickered as though considering his words. "The darkness you speak of is not new," it said softly, its voice now tinged with a sorrow that was almost palpable. "It is ancient, older than the stars themselves. It is a force that consumes, that erases the very essence of what it touches. It feeds not just on flesh, but on the will to survive, on the very spirit of life itself." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he remained steadfast, unwilling to show the fear that crept up on him. "We've been fighting it. But we don't know how to stop it. We don't even know what it is. What is this darkness?" The being's form flickered again, its shape becoming momentarily translucent as it spoke. "The darkness is not a what, but a who. It is the void itself, an ancient entity of destruction that was once bound by forces long forgotten. It was the destroyer of civilizations, the end of entire species. But its power has returned. And now, it seeks to undo everything." Isla stepped forward, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "You're saying the void is real? It's not just a myth? How do you know all this?" The being's form seemed to swell with an ancient grief. "I was one of the keepers who once stood against it. But we failed. We failed in ways that cannot be undone. And now, it is up to those like you to decide the fate of the stars." A heavy silence fell over the group, each survivor feeling the weight of the being's words settling over them like a cold, suffocating blanket. Marcus, however, held on to his resolve. If there was even a sliver of hope, he would take it. He couldn't let the darkness claim the galaxy, couldn't let humanity disappear without a fight. His own will to survive burned brighter than ever. "We're not done fighting," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We've got nothing left to lose, but we won't go quietly into the dark. We'll fight until the very end." The being's eyes softened, its voice carrying a faint note of admiration. "You are the last of your kind, Marcus Hale. Your spirit is strong, and it is your strength that will either save you or destroy you. But be warned, the darkness will test you. It will test you in ways you cannot begin to understand." Marcus's gaze never wavered. "We'll face it, together. We've made it this far. We won't stop now." The being's form seemed to grow more solid, more defined as it stepped forward, a deep hum filling the air around them. It reached out its hand, and for a moment, Marcus thought it might strike them down. But instead, the entity opened its palm, revealing a small, glowing orb that pulsed with an inner light. "This is a key," the being explained, its voice echoing in their minds once more. "It will guide you. It will show you the path you must take to stop the void's advance. But be warned, the darkness is not the only danger. There are those who will seek to use this power for their own gain. Do not trust those who would sacrifice everything for power. Marcus reached out and took the orb, feeling its warmth spread through his fingers. It felt alive, like it had a heartbeat of its own. He didn't know what it meant or how it could help them, but one thing was certain: this was the answer they had been searching for. I don't know how this works, Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with both awe and determination. But we'll figure it out. The being nodded, its eyes dimming slightly as if it were fading from view. The future is never certain, but it is not yet written. What happens next depends on you. With that, the being's form began to dissolve into the shadows of the ship, its voice lingering in Marcus's mind. Good luck, travelers. And remember, never let the darkness consume your spirit. For as long as you fight, you are not truly lost. And then, just like that, the being was gone. The ship fell silent once more, the only sound the soft hum of its strange, alien machinery. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his hands still clenched around the glowing orb, feeling the weight of its power. We have a chance, he said finally, his voice low but filled with an unshakable resolve. Isla nodded, her eyes locked onto the orb in his hand. Then let's make it count. The crew gathered around, their eyes filled with determination. The darkness was still out there, looming, but now they had a weapon. A key to unlock the path to victory, or destruction. Whatever the future held, they would face it head-on. The Seraphim hummed softly as it drifted away from the alien vessel, its engines pushing against the oppressive darkness that stretched out in every direction. Inside the ship, the survivors gathered in the common area, the orb glowing faintly in the center of their makeshift command table. The air was thick with the weight of the mission that had been placed on their shoulders, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. The Keeper's warning echoed in Marcus's mind, but he couldn't afford to dwell on doubt. There was too much at stake. Marcus stood, his eyes fixed on the orb in his hand, still pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Isla, standing beside him, crossed her arms, her expression unreadable but thoughtful. What now? She asked, her voice steady, though there was a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. We have this, whatever it is. But what do we do with it? Marcus didn't have an answer for her. Not yet. He knew the orb held the key to something important, but how it worked or what it could do was still a mystery. He placed the orb on the table, its glow illuminating the dark room in a soft, rhythmic pulse. The survivors watched it intently, each of them waiting for some sign, some revelation that would tell them their next move. Let's try everything, Marcus said after a long pause, his voice firm. We've got nothing to lose. We'll figure this out. A sense of resolve settled over the group. They were all survivors, fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for humanity's future. They had no choice but to move forward. The survivors spent the next few days poring over the orb, trying everything they could think of. Isla analyzed it with every tool at her disposal, trying to understand its structure. She scanned it with every scanner and device the Seraphim had, but nothing seemed to yield any immediate answers. The orb remained mysterious, its surface smooth and unyielding to their technology. Marcus spent hours alone in the ship's command center, studying the star maps and the fragments of information they had gathered from the alien ship. There had to be a connection between the orb and the void, something that linked this strange object to the destruction they were facing. But the more he researched, the more questions piled up. There were no clear answers. The knowledge they had uncovered was fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the galaxy. One night, as Marcus sat in the dim light of the command center, his hand resting on the orb, he felt a strange vibration pass through it. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but then the orb pulsed once, then twice, a steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. He stood up, staring at it, his pulse quickening. The room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows outside the viewport deepened. Was it reacting to something? Was it guiding them? He pressed his palm against its surface, and for a moment, he felt an electric jolt surge through his body, as though the orb had recognized him, acknowledging his presence. A low hum filled the air as the orb's light brightened, casting shadows across the room. Then, in a sudden rush, a map appeared in Marcus's mind, strange symbols, celestial coordinates, and what appeared to be a path. It was as if the orb was communicating directly with him, bypassing words altogether and transmitting knowledge in pure thought. The map was clear, a distant system, marked with an ominous symbol. The coordinates were far from their current location, deep in uncharted space, a place the survivors had never ventured before. But there was no doubt in Marcus's mind. This was where they needed to go. This was where the battle would be fought. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Marcus standing alone in the command center, his hand still resting on the orb. The hum had stopped, but the image of the map burned in his mind. He rushed to the communications room, sending a signal to Isla and the others. They needed to know what he had just seen. It was time to make a decision. The survival of humanity was at stake, and they had a path forward, though it was one that led straight into the heart of the darkness they had been running from. Within moments, Isla and the rest of the crew gathered in the common area, their faces filled with concern as Marcus relayed the vision he had experienced. "It's a location," Marcus explained, his voice still heavy with the intensity of what he had seen. "A place where we can end this. It's far from here, deep in uncharted space, but that's where the answer lies." Isla frowned, her gaze fixed on him as though weighing the risks. "You're saying we go there, and what? Face the void? Take the fight to them?" Marcus nodded. "We don't know what's waiting for us there, but we have no other choice. The void is relentless. If we run, it will only follow. We have to stop it before it's too late." The survivors exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. They had fought hard to survive, but this was different. This wasn't just about staying alive, it was about taking the fight to the very heart of the darkness, facing an enemy that had already destroyed civilizations, an enemy that could consume everything they loved. Isla sighed, her resolve hardening. "We've come this far. We'll follow you, Marcus. We're in this together." The others nodded, one by one, a shared sense of purpose binding them together. This was their moment. There was no going back. Marcus turned to the helm and entered the coordinates into the Seraphim's navigation system. The ship's engines roared to life, its lights flickering as it began to accelerate toward the unknown. "Prepare yourselves," Marcus said, his voice low but unwavering. "We're going to the heart of the darkness." As the Seraphim hurtled through the void, the survivors stood at their stations, bracing themselves for whatever lay ahead. The darkness was closing in on them, but now they had a chance, maybe the only chance, to stop it. They had the key, the knowledge, and the will to fight. All they had to do now was reach the heart of the void and face it head-on. The Seraphim surged through the vast emptiness of space, its engines pushing them ever closer to the unknown destination marked by the orb. The crew was on edge, the tension palpable as the ship hurtled toward the heart of the void. Marcus stood at the command center, his eyes locked on the swirling star charts and the looming darkness that had become their inevitable destination. The coordinates from the orb had guided them to a place unlike any they had ever seen, a place where the stars themselves seemed to vanish into a vast nothingness. Isla stood beside him, her face set with determination, but even she couldn't completely mask the worry in her eyes. The journey was long, and with every passing hour, the unease among the survivors deepened. The further they traveled, the more oppressive the silence of space seemed to become, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in anticipation. "We're almost there," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "Just a few more hours." Isla nodded, her gaze still fixed on the starless expanse ahead. "I just hope we're ready for whatever waits for us there." "We don't have a choice," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "We've come too far. We'll face whatever comes together." The rest of the crew, though silent, could feel the weight of the moment. Each of them was gripped by the gravity of their mission, the knowledge that their survival, and the survival of everything they had ever known, hung in the balance. No one spoke of the fear gnawing at their insides, the worry that this final journey might be their last. Instead, they focused on the task at hand, preparing themselves for the unknown. As the hours passed, the Seraphim continued to cut through the darkness, its systems running smoothly despite the unsettling nature of the journey. But the closer they came to their destination, the more the strange sense of unease began to build. The stars, once bright and constant, began to fade from view, and the darkness pressed in on them from all sides. It was as if they were moving through a tunnel, an empty space where no light could penetrate, where even the distant glow of distant suns could not reach. Marcus's thoughts raced as he stared into the void. He knew this place, the emptiness that surrounded them, was not natural. It was the mark of something far older, far more dangerous. The void, as the being had called it. The destroyer of worlds. The entity that sought to consume all. "What's happening?" Isla asked, her voice cutting through Marcus's thoughts. He turned to find her staring at the viewport, her expression unreadable. The stars had completely vanished. All that remained was an overwhelming, impenetrable blackness that seemed to stretch out into infinity. It was like they had entered a space where time itself no longer made sense, a place where reality was bending under the weight of something far beyond their understanding. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice low and uncertain. "But I don't think this is just a place. I think this is the heart of it. The void is here." The ship shuddered suddenly, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled every system aboard. The lights flickered, and the crew was thrown off balance for a moment as the ship's automated systems fought to compensate for the anomaly. The atmosphere inside the ship felt charged, as if the very air was alive with an invisible energy. "We're being pulled," Isla said, her voice tense. "The gravity, something's pulling us in." Marcus's hands flew over the controls, his eyes scanning the instruments. The ship's engines were still working, but it was as though an invisible force was overwhelming them, dragging the Seraphim deeper into the heart of the darkness. The readouts were flashing red, and the navigation system was glitching. They were losing control. "This isn't good," Marcus muttered, his brow furrowing as he struggled to regain control of the ship. "It's like the ship's systems are fighting against something, alive." Suddenly, the Seraphim lurched violently to one side, the force of it throwing everyone off balance. The crew scrambled to hold on as the ship was violently jerked through space, its trajectory completely out of their control. Marcus's stomach twisted with a sense of dread, and he knew that they were no longer in control. They were at the mercy of whatever force dwelled in this place. "What the hell is happening?" Isla yelled, gripping the edge of a nearby console as the ship groaned under the pressure. "Is it the void?" "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice grim. "But whatever it is, it's trying to pull us into its core." Another violent jolt threw the crew to the floor, and the ship's systems began to malfunction. Lights flickered, and the sounds of alarms began to blare throughout the vessel. The gravitational field was intensifying, and it was only a matter of time before the Seraphim was completely pulled into whatever abyss lay ahead. "Prepare for impact," Marcus shouted over the chaos, his voice sharp with urgency. "Everyone, hold on." But it was too late. A blinding light erupted from the center of the ship, followed by a wave of energy that radiated outward, engulfing the entire vessel. For a moment, Marcus thought the ship was going to tear apart, the force of the energy too much for even the Seraphim to withstand. Then, everything went still. The ship had come to a sudden stop, frozen in place, its engines dead and its systems completely shut down. The crew was left in stunned silence, the only sound the faint hum of the damaged system struggling to stay online. Marcus blinked, his senses slowly coming back into focus. He was sitting in the command chair, his hands gripping the armrests. He could hear Isla's voice in the background, but it felt distant, like he was underwater. What just happened?" Isla asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his heart pounding in his chest. "But we're not dead, yet." He slowly stood up, his legs feeling weak beneath him as he stumbled toward the viewport. What he saw outside made his blood run cold. The ship was hovering in the heart of the darkness. But it wasn't just a void. There, in the center of the vast emptiness, was something moving, a massive, shadowy form, a presence so powerful it seemed to distort reality itself. It was a shape that loomed over them, dark and formless, a manifestation of the void. This was it. The heart of the darkness. The source of the destruction. And it was alive. Marcus's heart raced as he stared at the immense, shifting form outside the viewport. The darkness was not empty after all. It was alive, alive with a power that was beyond comprehension. The ship was trapped, suspended in the void, caught in the gravitational pull of something that defied the laws of nature. The presence before them, a vast, amorphous shape, seemed to pulse with an energy that distorted reality itself. It was as though the very fabric of space bent around it, warping everything it touched. "We have to move. We need to get out of here." Isla's voice trembled, her eyes wide with fear as she looked at the looming mass outside the ship. But Marcus stood frozen. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the dark, shifting form. It was like staring into the abyss, but this abyss was different. This was the heart of the void, the force that had been tearing the universe apart for eons. This was the thing they had come to stop. "We can't outrun it," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. "This is what we came for. This is what we have to face." The ship groaned as another pulse of energy reverberated through it, and Marcus felt a sharp pain in his skull, like his mind was being pulled in every direction at once. The ship's systems were beginning to short-circuit, their signals distorted by the presence of the void. It was as if the ship itself were being swallowed up by the darkness. "We can't fight it," Isla shouted, her hands gripping the edge of the console as she struggled to remain steady. "This is too much. We need to get out while we can." Marcus shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No. We've come too far. This ends here. This ends now." He turned away from the viewport, his eyes scanning the control panels. The orb, the key, was still glowing faintly on the table, its light now flickering in time with the pulsing energy outside. There was a connection, a bond between the orb and the presence in the void. It was as though the orb had been leading them here, guiding them to the very heart of the darkness. He rushed over to it, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. It hummed in response, its energy thrumming through his fingertips, and he could feel the pulse of power deep within it. The orb wasn't just a guide, it was a weapon. A tool. And it was the only chance they had left. "Everyone, listen." Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through the panic that had begun to rise among the crew. "The orb, it's connected to this thing, the void. If we use it, maybe we can stop it." Isla, still pale from the fear and strain, looked at Marcus with wide eyes. "Are you sure? We don't even know what it does." "I don't care," Marcus snapped, his gaze locked on the orb. "This is our only shot." With trembling hands, he lifted the orb from the table, feeling the warm, pulsing energy surge through his body. The ship around him seemed to vibrate in harmony with the object, as though it too recognized its purpose. Marcus closed his eyes, focusing on the strange connection between the orb and the entity outside the ship. He could feel the power of the void, the vast, destructive force that had consumed entire worlds. He could feel its presence in every corner of his mind, trying to overwhelm him, to crush his spirit. But Marcus held firm. He had faced death before, and he wasn't about to let this darkness swallow him now. The orb's light intensified, flooding the room with a brilliant glow. The pulsating energy outside the ship seemed to resonate with it, the dark form shifting as if aware of the challenge. Marcus gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. "Isla, now," he shouted. Isla, understanding his intent, raced to the ship's main control panel and began to work in tandem with Marcus. She didn't ask questions. She trusted him. They both knew what had to be done. The orb's light blazed brighter, and Marcus felt the ship lurch as though it were being pulled into the center of the void itself. The gravity of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore, but Marcus didn't falter. He focused all his willpower on the orb, willing it to unleash its power, to break the connection between the ship and the void. A deep, resonant hum filled the ship as the orb's light flared to a blinding intensity, and Marcus could feel the force of the void pushing back against him, a wave of pure destruction crashing into his mind. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean, the tides of oblivion pulling at his very soul. And then, with a sudden burst of force, the orb released its energy in a brilliant pulse, a shockwave of light and power that reverberated through the ship, through the void itself. The dark form outside the ship convulsed, its shadowy mass writhing and shifting violently, as if in pain. The gravitational pull weakened, and the oppressive energy that had been pressing in on them began to dissipate. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Then, with a final, deafening roar, the void shattered. The ship lurched violently, throwing the crew off balance, but Marcus held on, his body shaking with the effort. The orb's light began to fade, its energy spent, but Marcus knew it had worked. The darkness that had been consuming the galaxy, the very force that had brought them to the brink of extinction, was gone. For a long moment, no one spoke. The ship was silent, and the crew was still recovering from the shock of what had just happened. The viewport, once filled with an impenetrable darkness, was now clear. The stars were back. The darkness had been pushed back, at least for now. Marcus stood there, his chest heaving, staring out at the vastness of space. It wasn't over, not completely. There were still battles to be fought, still darkness to face. But they had won this fight. The void had been stopped. Isla came up beside him, her eyes filled with awe. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah. We did." The crew gathered around, the weight of the moment sinking in. They had come to the edge of the universe, faced an ancient force of destruction, and somehow, against all odds, they had survived. They were still alive. And humanity had a future. But Marcus knew one thing for sure: as long as there was darkness, they would continue to fight. Because that's what humans did. They fought, even when the odds were impossible. They never gave up. And that, Marcus realized, was the true power of the human spirit.